For plenty of executives and others, a board seat is somewhat of an aspirational goal. And so, why is that? And I guess there's the money, of course. This is a U.S. number, but I know the Canadian number is fairly close to this. The average total director compensation was $312,000 for a publicly traded corporation. That's according to the Spencer Stewart Board Index. And so that's one reason. And then, two, it's a bit of a career boost for some. There's research published in the Harvard Business Review recently, and it found that when an executive gets a board seat, snags that board seat, they're 44% more likely to be promoted as a first-time CEO to say a privately traded company like an S&P 1500 firm. And even if they don't get that promotion, their annual pay typically goes up by about 13% if they get a board seat. So that's two reasons: the career boost and of course the compensation. But it's also an opportunity for some to cycle out of that kind of the daily grind of C-suite life. If you're inclined to walk away from the day-to-day running of a company, or you're looking at retirement but you don't want to retire, then a board seat is often a great way to put your skills to work without that constant stress of the day to day in a full-time leadership role. And then fourthly, it's a chance to give back for some. With years of experience, now you've got this chance to guide, to advise, and anybody from a burgeoning startup to a a longer serving or type of organization, eager for a bit of a steady hand. Maybe it's a generations old company that you're going to be on the board of, but that need to pivot to address the challenges of the day. Maybe you're just going to give back to that type of organization. And so if you're ready to sign up, we've got some good news and some bad news if you're looking for that paid board seat. And I guess the bad news is this: that securing a board seat, it often involves now a highly competitive process, and that culminates after years of networking. So that's the bad news, but there is some good news. And the good news is, as they hunt for that next board member, today's organizations are seeking depth and breadth in experience and perspective. So the boardroom has opened up for many. Boards don't want just the generic CEO leader anymore. They're going much more broadly. And as the world gets more complicated, organizations are looking for experts in everything from, maybe it's going to be technology or digital transformation. They're looking for diversity, and maybe they're looking for someone with global business practices. Maybe it's some other area. So they don't want just that generic, let's fill our boardroom with CEOs. They're really looking to expand. And so as a response to even global justice movements, and to ensure companies are serving increasingly diverse customer bases, they're also on the lookout for board members from every background. So here's another interesting statistic about that. Spencer Stewart's they do a report. There's a nominating and governance chair survey report that they put out in 2021. And it said that the new class, this is in the US, and Canada is usually ahead of the US in this, but this is in the US, their new class of S&P 500 directors are the most racially and ethnically diverse ever seen in the US. And there's about 72% of the new independent directors in that S&P 500 are from typically underrepresented groups, including women, people of color, and it's up 59% from the year before. So just because corporations have opened up their boardroom doors wider, however, getting a seat is still no walk in the park. And so for those just beginning their journey, the process can seem a little bit shrouded in mystery, but take heart. Somewhere out there, there is an organization that needs you, that needs your expertise and your perspective. And there are steps that you can take right now to set yourself up for success. And so, David, I'm going to just pop this over to you, and you can tell us what that first step is.
Sure. Thanks, Deborah. Well, the first step is know them. Know the aspirations of your audience. Not that long ago, it was easy to figure out who board members were looking for when they needed somebody new to join their fold. It was their friend at their golf course, their old college buddy, former coworker. They looked to people in their network who had risen to the C-suite in their respective companies, usually the CEO, and that was enough. For decades, boards filled vacant seats through personal connections, and because of longtime practices and biases that have made it difficult, if not impossible, for women and people of color to rise through the ranks, new board members looked no different than the board members they replaced. They were pretty much all white men. So, for all the right reasons, the path to the boardroom is different today. It's no longer exclusively an enclave for older white male CEOs. Increasingly, the faces in the boardrooms are reflective of the diverse world we live in. In other words, while the general business expertise of a CEO might have been enough for boards a generation ago, it's not anymore. Boards need a broad range of executives with very specific expertise to help address the complicated nature of today's business decisions.
Yeah, I got an email from someone just recently when we were marketing and letting people know we are going to talk about this today. And he said, well, I don't think I need to come to this because I'm a white male and we just can't get, we're just old news now. And so I would say that's not that's not accurate at all. And this gentleman was feeling like just because the boardroom is being open to everybody, that meant excluding him, and that's just not the case at all. The point is that boards are looking for a range of diversity of thought, and it doesn't mean excluding one group over another. It means including all groups so that they can get the most competent, the most diverse board that they can get. And so, David, thanks for that. And as you talk about knowing them, it reminds me too of when you're giving a speech, you have to know your audience. And so many people think, well, I want to get a seat on the board, but then they don't take the time to really know and understand the organization and what they need around their boardroom table. So thanks for that. We had a board just last week that argued that they didn't need expertise in the boardroom because they had it in their management team. So why do we want diversity in the boardroom? Why can't we just keep it like it is? And this was a board of a dozen gentlemen who all kind of looked the same. And so they just felt they didn't need diversity and they didn't need to change the expertise because management had the expertise. And I would say the logic, and this is a little bit faulty, if the role of the board is to oversee, it's very difficult to oversee something you don't understand. And without broad expertise, boards are challenged to gain confidence in management assumptions and management assertions, and they may not even know what questions to ask. So their questions will tend toward low-level fact-finding ones in the boardroom that are more about building their own understanding of a subject rather than being strategic oversight types of questions or queries that are going to test assumptions and lead to confidence in direction and control. And so this is just one reason why you might want a board set of competency, a broad set of competencies built around the boardroom table table. And if you want a seat at that table, you need to know what it is. You need to know your audience and what are those competencies that they be looking for.
Yeah, I mean, that's why companies are increasingly laser focused on building a board that acts as a collective mind, a little bit like a portfolio, building a portfolio. Each individual has distinct interests, competencies, and skills, attributes that, as a whole, collectively, provide the answers and the innovations required to function effectively in today's fast moving environment. So, as board seats open up, board members typically run through a series of exercises to determine the experience, skills, knowledge, education, and diversity of those who remain at the table, and the gaps then they need to fill because of the turnover of the people that are leaving the board. So, that's your first step. Understand what the skills matrix is calling for. What is the profile of competencies, attributes, and diversity of your client, the audience that we're talking about, the organization that is seeking board members, and identify where they may have gaps that you are uniquely equipped to fill.
Yeah, exactly. You have to know them. You have to know what they want and need. And so now, David, the next step, I think we can move on to that. The next step after knowing them is showing them. So let's talk about that one.
Sure. So when we talk about show them, what we're talking about is customizing your resume to have the CV or resume that you send to organization should never be the same twice. It should be customized and adapted. So you've studied the profile, the matrix, the gaps that have been identified in the board posting. And so you know your audience, you know what their aspirations are for their next board member. So read through that, read through it again, and take note of the specific attributes, skills, and experience that they're looking for, and those that you match up with. Pull out the ones that you match up with and think about how can you meet those? How can you fill their gaps? These are their aspirations, their needs. How can you do this? This isn't about what you need, it's about what they need and want. Think of them as the client and you're the vendor, if you will. And so when applying, the focus is providing boards with what they need. Once you have a thorough understanding of what their needs and their gaps are, you can craft your response, both your cover letter and your resume, by putting together a board level resume that shows off why you're the right person for the job. So just like on a job hunt, you likely won't check yes on every single requirement for a board seat. Don't worry about that. The perfect fit is rare. It's unlikely there's many people who've served in both senior IT and HR roles, for example. But as you peruse board member listings, don't be discouraged if you have little experience in one or two categories. Your application is about showing off the expertise that you do have, shining light on the gaps that you can help them fill. So you probably already have an executive resume that's carefully crafted to fit the general needs of headhunters or potential employers as you look to step up in your career. It demonstrates your ability to lead with excellence. It likely lists your academic and career history, quantitative, qualitative results of your leadership, how you fit within the hierarchy of the organization's leadership. So that's a good starting point as you begin to apply for board seats, but you're not done yet. That's not enough to land you on. That probably won't get you on the short list. You need to adapt it to become a board resume. Think of it as your sales pitch to the specific needs of the board. So reframe your generic resume through the lens of your experience in setting direction and overseeing organizational results. Keep in mind, board members aren't expected to be tacticians, so you don't want to overly emphasize your operational experience. They're expected to be able to step back to direct and oversee. So does your resume demonstrate your capacity to do that?
Yeah, thanks for that, David. As you were talking there, I was reminded because we do these searches for boards from time to time, and we often see a difference in terms of how different genders match their board level resume to a position. Often women, and this is just a bit of an aside, but women often undersell themselves and men will tend to oversell themselves, and for whatever reason we see that time after time after time. And so you'll want to think about that and really look objectively at what are the competencies they're looking for, and how do you uniquely and perfectly match those competencies. And you and I think David mentioned this, but you want to craft each resume specific to an opportunity. If there's a couple of boards that you think you would be a good fit for, you just, cookie cutter is not going to be your friend here. And so, and again, just to reiterate that a resume for a board position is very different than one for a traditional job. You absolutely need to demonstrate your oversight, direction, and control responsibilities, not your tactical responsibilities. So now on to step 3, David. And so you know them, you can show them. So now let's talk about that next step, which is actually reaching them.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. So step 3, reach them. We're talking about networking, both digitally and personally. Not every board is going to proactively seek out the candidates. A lot of boards still use the I know a guy method of choosing directors. So, would like it or not, networking is still needed and visibility is a must. You probably didn't secure your current job from simply responding to a job ad, and it's highly unlikely you're going to win a board seat, especially a paid board seat, by scanning the classifieds. Today's job searches, whether it's for hourly shift work, a C-suite position, or a board seat, are often all about networking. Teens get leads on their first jobs from their network of friends and parents' friends. Professionals move up the ladder after years of building their own network of colleagues, and with the help of professional networkers, executive search firms with tentacles that reach even further. So to get a board seat, today's candidates must move forward with a multi-pronged approach that includes not just scouring online listings and perfecting their board resume, but building an authentic, personal, and professional network and fine-tuning your brand, your online presence. Board members and HR professionals are increasingly using their own networks and targeted searches through executive placement firms to find candidates. And what's more, they're more often relying on artificial intelligence tools to scour websites and social media platforms to identify the candidates who fit their profile. So here's some specific steps you can take to help you here with reaching them. Start by connecting digitally with people including referrals and contacts. LinkedIn is a perfect place for this. Build a relationship with those existing contacts by following what they're up to. Ask for introductions to their connections. Engage with them. Ask someone to review your resume for you and give you feedback. Share success stories. Follow up. Help them out. Thank them.
Yeah, I think sometimes networking is hard for some people. I'm reminded a little bit, and I asked my son if I could share this story, and he said it was okay. But I'm reminded of when he was about 16 years old and he wanted to get a job. And so he crafted up a resume, and then he just kind of gave it to a couple of people, and then went up to his room and worked on playing his guitar, and was surprised that nobody was reaching out to him. And so he had a bit of a learning experience.
This is not where I want to get up.
If you want to get a job, you kind of have to get out there and network and take responsibility for that. People aren't going to come to you. How do you do that? You do that by nailing the interview. And we got good news here too, and that's that you have already done a thorough review of the candidate profile when you customized your resume. So you should already have some really good insight into what's important to the board. You already know what skills and competencies they're looking for. So now you want to build and have some stories prepared that are going to show your knowledge in those areas, stories that show them you can use that knowledge in a boardroom setting. And so, as I said, we conduct a number of searches for boards each year, and it's just shocking to me, actually, how many senior people get into the interview for a board position and they lose that position within moments. And it's just immediately obvious that they haven't prepared for the interview at all. They haven't thought ahead to what questions they might be asked, and they haven't thought ahead to how they might have answered those questions. And they haven't thought ahead to how they might frame those questions by telling a story. And so the art of nailing the interview, and I suppose for a board interview or any other interview, is all about storytelling. If the interviewers use behavioral interview questions, and in a boardroom setting, they are absolutely going to use behavioral interviews. They're going to be trying to assess how you would behave in the boardroom and what your character is like. So if you have stories that describe how you take those competencies and use them to oversee, to direct, and ensure accountability and gain reasonable assurance, you're going to go a lot farther in that interview. They can always assess your competency through your resume or through just looking you up online, and they will have done that. They may have done a social media assessment of you before you get into that interview. So they're really wanting to know how you behave and what your character is like. And so they'll probably start with something like, tell me about a time. And if they ask you, tell me about a time, they're begging for a good story. So you want to prepare. If you want to nail the interview, you should get in your mind straight 15 to 20 good stories about yourself. And you're going to have to dig deep and find those successes that can be applied in a boardroom setting, and craft those stories that explain who you are, how you lead, and what's important to you, and therefore how you can meet the needs of their organization in their boardroom. And it takes time to do that, but it is time well spent, because you don't want to get to that interview and lose it on the interview just because you didn't have a good handful of stories to tell, and just because you didn't tell them in an engaging way. So know yourself, build stories based on your uniqueness, on your character, your skills, your personality. It can't be a facade. It's got to be
Authentic.
It's about who you are, what you stand for, what you bring to the table. And the more authentic the stories, the more practiced you are at telling them, the better you are going to nail that interview. And it's no time for false humility. Building a personal brand is really about showing people who you are and what you have to offer. And interviewing well it's both an art and a science, and it's a skill you need to have and keep it sharp. And you might want to try to find somebody to interview with. And practice sharpens the message. It keeps you from being a rambler. And I can tell you, we've seen some ramblers in our day. And I can also tell you the ramblers never get that board seat. So, okay, last step, David, impress them.
Yes, step number 5, impress them. Get your professional director designation. Serving on a board is neither a hobby nor a pastime, nor a way for a particular shareholder to get their way, shouldn't be, nor an opportunity to supplant oneself as a de facto CEO.
Well, we've seen that.
It should be a trusted fiduciary position at the very top of an organization, and that requires special training and skill. The more educated you are in governance, the better the interview will go. the better your chances are that you will land those coveted board seats that'll differentiate you from other people around the table. By obtaining your professional director designation and keeping it up to date, they become the standard in boardrooms around the world. I remember when we first founded director education and certification programs a few years ago, a lot of people, they kind of ridiculed us and made fun of it and said, "Oh, we don't need that. And what are you talking about? These will never catch on. You're wasting your time." And we had a vision that within a generation, a designation would become a standard expectation of people who serve on boards. And interestingly enough, we're not even a generation into it. We're just a few years into introducing governance designation and the professional director program, and it's becoming the standard in boardrooms around the world. When you look at board skills matrices, how many of them say, governance designation, professional director? So you can't excel in public relations without first having learned how, and it's no different from becoming a board member. A professional director brings something with them. They have impeccable character and emotional maturity. They're engaged and qualified in governance. They understand the role of a board members. They know how to ask profound questions. They're courageous, certain, curious, confident, and above all, they're competent in corporate governance and in the application of governance principles and practices. Why? Because they've studied the profession and thought of it as a profession and earned their designation. If a board's faced with two great potential board candidates, otherwise equal, one has their governance designation, the other doesn't, they're going to choose the one with the designation 100 times out of 100. And we know what it's like to be in your shoes. Through our professional director education and certification program, we've worked with hundreds of aspiring board members, just like you. Once they graduate, they're ready and eager to serve. Their designation helps them secure that coveted board seat.
Yeah, I mean, that first board position, it can be the toughest one to get. So there's a couple of other tips here. Sometimes having not-for-profit board experience, do that first. And so you've got some experience to go along with your designation. You've maybe worked with the board in your paid employment, like you're a CEO or a CFO or HR executive or some other position that reports to a board. And so having worked with the board, that also helps you go for a for-profit position. So whether you're in the starting blocks looking for that first position, or you're just looking to add to the wealth of experience you already have, the best step you can take to set yourself up as the most appealing candidate for that position is to prepare, do your homework, and then go and get that seat. And I would say here's the secret sauce. Getting appointed to a board is not about getting what you want. It's about giving the board what they need. If you can remember that and prepare with that mindset, that will take you a long way to succeeding. So you want to know them, you want to be ready, learn all you can about the organization, show them who you are by creating a resume that's designed at the board level, reach them by proactively networking digitally. Absolutely digitally, and crafting your brand in the social space and networking personally with the right people. Stand out to them by being prepared for that all important interview, and then impress them with your governance certification. Get that professional director designation.